What if I told you the person who will save your entire life is someone you barely notice? Someone you walk past every day without looking up? That single question lingers in the air like a quiet accusation, because we have all done it. We have all hurried past the same faces, the same uniforms, the same silent figures who keep the world running while we chase bigger things. We never imagined that one of them might hold the only key when everything we built finally falls apart. Now the story begins. Kenzie Perry commanded an empire that most men only dream about. From the towering headquarters that pierced the night sky of the city, his investment group moved billions across continents with the press of a button. Private equity funds in London answered to him. Hedge positions in Singapore shifted at his word. Real estate portfolios in Dubai and Sydney carried his signature. For 12 straight years the financial press had called him untouchable, the disciplined genius who turned hunger into dominance. At 38 he stood tall, dark hair framing a structured face, eyes so intense they seemed to carry the weight of every deal he had ever closed. Success had sculpted him into something handsome yet remote, a man whose presence filled rooms but rarely invited anyone inside. Tonight that empire was dying in front of him. He sat alone on the top floor, surrounded by walls of screens that usually glowed with confident green. Now every monitor bled red. Alerts cascaded downward like digital blood. One account after another flashed the same impossible numbers, 0. Liquid holdings that had totaled 9 figures an hour earlier now read empty. Offshore reserves vanished. Domestic vaults locked him out with cold authentication failures. Entire subsidiaries went dark without a single warning bell from the risk department. It did not happen slowly. It did not announce itself. It arrived as a coordinated, merciless strike. Kenzie stabbed at keyboards, voice commands, emergency lines. Nothing responded. His executive team had trickled out hours ago with vague excuses about needing rest before tomorrow's board vote. Phones rang into voicemail. Text messages sat undelivered. Even the head of security, a man paid 7 figures to prevent exactly this, had gone silent. Partners he had known for a decade refused to pick up. In the space of 90 minutes the world he had built with ruthless precision abandoned him completely. He leaned back in the leather chair and felt a hollowness deeper than any he had ever known. Not even the nights spent sleeping on sacks of rice in the back room of his mother's tiny grocery store had felt this absolute. Back then there had been the smell of warm bread and the soft hum of her voice counting change. Tonight there was only the low electric whine of failing servers and the distant shimmer of city lights far below, indifferent to the ruin of one more king. Then he heard it. Soft wheels rolling across carpet. The faint metallic rattle of bottles in a plastic caddy. A sound so ordinary that on any other night he would not have registered it at all. The door opened without a knock. Alaia Harmon stepped inside pushing her cleaning cart. She wore the standard navy uniform, sleeves rolled once, hair pulled back in a simple knot that revealed the gentle curve of her neck. Nothing about her demanded attention. She was slight, calm, her face carrying the kind of quiet beauty that did not shout but settled into a room like warm light. Her eyes, dark and thoughtful, held an intelligence most people never bothered to notice. She stopped when she saw him. Most night staff would have lowered their gaze, emptied the trash in silence, and slipped away. Alaia did not. Her attention moved past him to the screens. She studied the cascading alerts, the looping error codes, the unnatural drainage patterns that no ordinary person should recognize. She spoke first, voice low and steady. Someone is siphoning your liquid accounts in real time. The routing signatures are masked, but the cadence is deliberate. This is not a glitch. Kenzie stared. The words landed with impossible precision. A janitor should not know routing signatures. A janitor should not read live infiltration the way others read the weather. He rose slowly, all 6 feet 3 inches of him, and still felt small. Who are you?
Welcome to the Alpha Empire, where greatness is built. If this inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe, and become a true part of the empire. Don't forget, this is the #1 way that you can assist us. Don't forget the notification so you can always see more of us. Thanks. We love you.
Alaia Harmon. I clean floors 12 through 18. She said it without apology, as if the answer explained nothing and everything at once. His pulse hammered against his ribs. The monitors behind him continued their death spiral. In less than 20 minutes, the last automated safeguards would trigger total shutdown. Regulators would be notified at dawn. Margin calls would cascade. By sunrise, Perry Capital would be a headline about the fastest collapse in history. He looked at the woman standing between him and oblivion. Her expression never wavered. Calm brown eyes met his without flinching. Kenzie reached to the lanyard around his neck. His fingers closed on the black master badge that granted root access to every system he owned. In 12 years he had never handed it to another living soul. Not his chief financial officer. Not the board. Not even the brother he no longer spoke to. He removed the badge and held it out. If you think you can stop this, he said, voice rough, it is yours. All of it. Alaia looked at the badge, then at him. For a moment the only sound was the frantic beep of dying servers. She took the badge without hesitation, slipped the lanyard over her head, and moved to the central workstation as naturally as if she had sat there 1,000 times before. Her fingers began to move across the keyboard. Lines of code scrolled upward. She opened diagnostic windows he had never seen, bypassed security layers with short, confident commands. Within seconds the torrent of red alerts slowed. A few accounts flickered back to life, frozen rather than drained. Kenzie stood behind her, watching in stunned silence as the woman who emptied his trash cans every night began to wrestle his empire back from the edge. She murmured to herself in a mixture of English and soft Hebrew phrases he could not translate. Her brow creased in concentration, but her hands never faltered. Minutes stretched. She isolated 3 separate attack vectors, severed them, and initiated trace routines that spidered outward through hidden channels. The main screen filled with cascading data streams only she seemed able to read. There, she said at last, pointing to a string of transactions rerouted through a shell entity in the Caymans. That is the primary bleed. I have slowed it, but the source is still masked. We have perhaps an hour before the next wave hits. Kenzie exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding. For the first time since the collapse began, the free fall felt interrupted. He pulled a second chair beside her. Tell me what you need. Alaia glanced at him, a faint, almost sad smile touching her lips. Coffee would be helpful. And then we follow the money. As the city lights glittered far below and the first pale hint of dawn crept across the horizon, Kenzie Perry sat shoulder to shoulder with the night janitor and watched her begin to save everything he had almost lost. In the quiet hum of recovering servers he felt something shift inside his chest, an unfamiliar mixture of awe and gratitude and the first fragile spark of genuine hope. The empire was still wounded. The traitor was still hidden. But for the first time that night, Kenzie was no longer alone. The first pale edge of dawn had not yet touched the glass when the aroma of strong coffee filled the executive suite. Kenzie set 2 paper cups on the desk beside Alaia, careful not to disturb the cascade of windows she had opened across 3 monitors. She murmured thanks without looking away from the screen. Her fingers moved in steady, economical patterns, opening logs, cross-referencing timestamps, closing doors the attackers had left ajar. Every few seconds she paused, tilted her head as though listening to something only she could hear, then typed again. Kenzie watched, still half convinced he was dreaming. An hour ago he had been preparing himself for total ruin. Now the bleeding had slowed to a trickle, and the woman in the Navy janitor uniform was the only reason his empire still had a pulse. Talk to me, he said quietly. What am I looking at? Alaia leaned back just enough to give him a clear view of the center screen. A spiderweb of transactions glowed in thin red lines. 3 separate intrusion points, all masked through legitimate vendor portals. Someone knew exactly where your soft spots were. They used scheduled maintenance windows to slip inside, then rerouted funds in small enough batches to stay under the radar until the final sweep. She tapped a key and the web tightened, revealing a single node pulsing brighter than the rest. This one is still active. I have isolated it, but I need context. Which division handles the Pacific Rim liquidity pool? Global macro. Elias runs point on that desk. The name left a sour taste. Kenzie reached for his phone again and dialed Elias Ward for the 7th time that night. Straight to voicemail. He fired off another text. Urgent. Call me now. No reply. A cold thread of suspicion began to coil in his gut. He forced his attention back to Alaia. You said you slowed the final sweep. How long do we have? 43 minutes until the next scheduled burst. After that, the trail goes cold for good. She did not raise her voice, yet the words carried the weight of a countdown. Kenzie nodded once. He rolled his sleeves higher and took the seat beside her. For the next half hour he became her guide through the labyrinth he had built. He recited account hierarchies from memory, recited override codes he had not spoken aloud in years, pointed out which subsidiaries were shells and which held real muscle. Alaia absorbed it all without flourish, asking sharp, precise questions that cut straight to vulnerability points. Between commands she spoke almost to herself. Gamzu el Tova, she whispered once when a trace routine returned partial results. Kenzie raised an eyebrow. She caught the look and offered a small, tired smile. An old saying. This, too, is for the good. Even when we cannot see how yet. He wanted to ask where a night janitor learned Hebrew proverbs and forensic routing analysis, but the clock was merciless. There would be time for questions later. If there was a later. At 4:17 a.m. the vending machine down the hall became their cafeteria. Kenzie returned with sandwiches neither of them truly wanted. Alaia ate half of hers in neat bites while her left hand kept working. Crumbs fell onto the keyboard and she brushed them away without breaking rhythm. Only then did the first real conversation begin. You have done this before, Kenzie said. It was not a question. Alaia's fingers paused over the keys. For a long moment she stared at the screen as though deciding how much truth the night could hold. A long time ago, she said at last. Different life. Different name on the door. He waited. Something in her tone told him pressing would be cruel. She continued anyway. After my husband died, the world got very loud. Meetings, hearings, people who wanted answers I did not have. Cleaning at night was quiet. No one asked me to save anything. I just emptied trash and wiped surfaces and went home. She gave a small shrug, the motion almost lost in the glow of the monitors. Tonight the trash will have to wait. Kenzie felt the weight of her loss settle between them like a third presence in the room. He understood grief that forced a person to reinvent themselves. He had done it at 17 when his mother's store went under and he swore he would never be powerless again. The memory rose unbidden, sleeping on a cot behind the register, counting pennies while creditors banged on the gate. He had built Perry Capital on the promise that no one would ever take anything from him again. Tonight someone had tried. And a person stopping them wore soft-soled shoes and pushed a cart. His phone buzzed on the desk. A single text from Elias glowed on the screen. Family emergency. Will call when I can. Kenzie stared at the words until they blurred. 10 years of shared victories, late nights, celebrations when deals closed. Family emergency at 4 in the morning on the night his company hemorrhaged billions. The cold thread of suspicion tightened into something sharper. Alaia noticed the change in his expression. She glanced at the message, then back to her screen. A new window had opened on its own, a trace she had left running in the background. She enlarged it. Look. She pointed to a string of numbers buried in server logs. Internal IP. Someone inside the building piggybacked the attack at 11:42 p.m. They masked it well, but not well enough. Kenzie leaned closer. The IP resolved to a terminal on the 42nd floor. Elias's private office. The room felt suddenly smaller. Alaia did not gloat or gasp. She simply closed the window and opened another, already chasing the next thread. "We keep going," she said softly. "One answer at a time." Kenzie rubbed a hand over his face. Exhaustion dragged at him, but adrenaline kept him upright. He stood and crossed to the credenza where spare workstations sat shrouded in dust covers. He pulled one into the light, powered it up, and gestured for Alaia to move her operations there. The executive desk was too exposed. This corner station sat against the wall with sight lines to every door. She transferred her sessions without comment, cables snaking across the carpet like lifelines. When she settled into the new chair, the badge he had given her caught the light. It looked out of place against the navy fabric, yet it belonged there now more than it ever had around his own neck. Outside the windows the sky shifted from black to bruised violet. Delivery trucks began their early rumble far below. The city was waking up to a day that would expect Perry Capital to be dead on arrival. Kenzie poured the last of the coffee and handed her the cup. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. "We are not finished," he said. "No," Alaia replied, eyes already back on the screen. "We are just beginning." She typed a new command. Somewhere deep in the servers a door she had closed hours ago cracked open again, and a thin stream of data began to flow toward them. The first real breadcrumb. Kenzie pulled his chair close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the weight of being untouchable felt lighter. He was still terrified. He was still furious. But he was no longer alone. As the sun finally breached the horizon and painted the office gold, two unlikely allies sat side by side, following a trail that led straight into the heart of everything Kenzie thought he knew about trust. The golden light of dawn spilled across the monitors, casting long shadows that danced with the flickering data streams. Alaia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at a cluster of transactions that branched like veins into obscure offshore nodes. Kenzie sat beside her, his own gaze fixed on the same screen, the warmth of the rising sun doing little to thaw the chill that had settled in his bones. The breadcrumb they had uncovered moments ago, an internal IP tied to Elias's office, hung between them like an unspoken accusation, but neither voiced it yet. The trail demanded pursuit first. Alaia initiated another trace, her commands weaving through layers of encryption with a precision that bordered on artistry. As the routine ran, she began to speak, her voice soft but deliberate, as if the words had been waiting for this exact moment to emerge. "You asked earlier if I had done this before," she said, not looking up from the keyboard. "The answer is yes. For nearly a decade, I worked as a forensic financial analyst in a federal crimes unit. We hunted white-collar predators, money launderers, insider traders, corporate saboteurs. I could follow a dollar through a dozen shell companies before breakfast." Kenzie's head turned sharply toward her. The revelation landed like a quiet explosion, reshaping everything he thought he knew about the woman beside him. He had assumed her knowledge came from some casual hobby or online course, not a high-stakes career in unraveling fraud at the highest levels. Surprise flickered across his features, followed quickly by a deep respect that softened the intense lines around his eyes. She continued, her fingers never pausing. "It started in college. Numbers always made sense to me, patterns and chaos. I rose fast, too fast maybe. But then my husband, David, got sick. A rare autoimmune disorder. One day he was laughing over Shabbat dinner, the next he could barely stand. Treatments drained our savings. I worked longer hours to cover the bills, but the job, it consumed me. Reminded me every day of what I could not fix. When he passed, the grief hit like a wave I could not swim against. Debt piled up. The pressure cracked me. I walked away from it all." Kenzie listened without interrupting, the story stirring echoes of his own buried pains. He had always prided himself on emotional armor, a necessity in a world where vulnerability invited knives. But hearing her lay bare such loss made his isolation feel sharper, more self-imposed. He glanced at her profile, noting the quiet strength in her posture, the way she held herself with a humility that masked profound resilience. "Why Janitor?" he asked gently, when she fell silent for a beat. With skills like that, you could have gone anywhere. Alaia's lips curved in a faint, wistful smile. Peace. Anonymity. No spotlights, no deadlines that could cost lives or fortunes. Just simple work that lets me think, or not think, as I need. My faith helped me see it that way. Judaism teaches us humility, that even the smallest acts have purpose. Who is wise? He who learns from everyone, as the sages say. And resilience? We have survived worse than personal storms. This job was my way of rebuilding, one quiet night at a time. The words resonated with Kenzie, contrasting sharply with his own path. He had clawed his way up from nothing, but success had isolated him further, turning relationships into transactions. Respect swelled in his chest for this woman who had chosen invisibility not out of defeat, but as a deliberate act of healing. As she spoke, the trace routine completed its cycle. A new map bloomed on the screen, revealing a web of shell accounts nested like Russian dolls. Alaia zoomed in, highlighting discrepancies that his entire risk team had overlooked for months. See here? These transfers cycle through dummy entities in Panama, then bounce to Cyprus. But the timestamps align perfectly with your quarterly audits. Someone manipulated the ledgers to make it look organic. Kenzie leaned in, his mind racing. The layers of deception peeled back under her scrutiny, exposing vulnerabilities he had trusted others to guard. My team runs triple checks on those. How did they miss this? Because it is subtle, Alaia replied. Like a whisper in a storm. But once you know the voice, you hear it everywhere. They dove deeper together, Kenzie providing passwords for restricted archives while Alaia cross-referenced them against the suspicious flows. As the morning light strengthened, casting a warm glow over the disheveled office, Kenzie found himself opening up in return. He recounted meeting Elias Ward a decade earlier, during a frantic merger that could have sunk his fledgling firm. Elias was the sharpest mind in the room back then, Kenzie said, his voice laced with nostalgia. We met at a conference in Geneva. I was 28, scraping by on coffee and ambition. He was the analyst who spotted a flaw in my pitch that no one else did. Saved me from a bad deal. After that, he joined as my right hand. We built this together, every expansion, every billion-dollar play. He was like the brother I never had, always there with the steady advice, the late-night strategy sessions. I trusted him with everything. Alaia nodded thoughtfully, her expression neutral as she navigated another layer of the web. But her next discovery sharpened the air between them. These board approvals, she said, pulling up a series of digital signatures. They are forged. The metadata shows edits post-submission. Look, the original timestamps were altered by someone with admin access. She transferred her sessions without comment, cables snaking across the carpet like lifelines. When she settled into the new chair, the badge he had given her caught the light. It looked out of place against the navy fabric, yet it belonged there now more than it ever had around his own neck. Outside the windows the sky shifted from black to bruised violet. Delivery trucks began their early rumble far below. The city was waking up to a day that would expect Perry Capital to be dead on arrival. Kenzie poured the last of the coffee and handed her the cup. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. We are not finished, he said. No, Alaia replied, eyes already back on the screen. We are just beginning. She typed a new command. Somewhere deep in the servers a door she had closed hours ago cracked open again, and a thin stream of data began to flow toward them. The first real breadcrumb. Kenzie pulled his chair close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the weight of being untouchable felt lighter. He was still terrified. He was still furious. But he was no longer alone. As the sun finally breached the horizon and painted the office gold, two unlikely allies sat side by side, following a trail that led straight into the heart of everything Kenzie thought he knew about trust. The golden light of dawn spilled across the monitors, casting long shadows that danced with the flickering data streams. Alaia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at a cluster of transactions that branched like veins into obscure offshore nodes. Kenzie sat beside her, his own gaze fixed on the same screen, the warmth of the rising sun doing little to thaw the chill that had settled in his bones. The breadcrumb they had uncovered moments ago, an internal IP tied to Elias's office, hung between them like an unspoken accusation, but neither voiced it yet. The trail demanded pursuit first. Alaia initiated another trace, her commands weaving through layers of encryption with a precision that bordered on artistry. As the routine ran, she began to speak, her voice soft but deliberate, as if the words had been waiting for this exact moment to emerge. "You asked earlier if I had done this before," she said, not looking up from the keyboard. "The answer is yes. For nearly a decade, I worked as a forensic financial analyst in a federal crimes unit. We hunted white-collar predators, money launderers, insider traders, corporate saboteurs. I could follow a dollar through a dozen shell companies before breakfast." Kenzie's head turned sharply toward her. The revelation landed like a quiet explosion, reshaping everything he thought he knew about the woman beside him. He had assumed her knowledge came from some casual hobby or online course, not a high-stakes career in unraveling fraud at the highest levels. Surprise flickered across his features, followed quickly by a deep respect that softened the intense lines around his eyes. She continued, her fingers never pausing. "It started in college. Numbers always made sense to me, patterns and chaos. I rose fast, too fast maybe. But then my husband, David, got sick. A rare autoimmune disorder. One day he was laughing over Shabbat dinner, the next he could barely stand. Treatments drained our savings. I worked longer hours to cover the bills, but the job, it consumed me. Reminded me every day of what I could not fix. When he passed, the grief hit like a wave I could not swim against. Debt piled up. The pressure cracked me. I walked away from it all." Kenzie listened without interrupting, the story stirring echoes of his own buried pains. He had always prided himself on emotional armor, a necessity in a world where vulnerability invited knives. But hearing her lay bare such loss made his isolation feel sharper, more self-imposed. He glanced at her profile, noting the quiet strength in her posture, the way she held herself with a humility that masked profound resilience. "Why janitor?" he asked gently, when she fell silent for a beat. "With skills like that, you could have gone anywhere." Alaia's lips curved in a faint, wistful smile. "Peace. Anonymity. No spotlights, no deadlines that could cost lives or fortunes. Just simple work that lets me think, or not think, as I need. My faith helped me see it that way. Judaism teaches us humility, that even the smallest acts have purpose. Who is wise? He who learns from everyone, as the sages say. And resilience? We have survived worse than personal storms. This job was my way of rebuilding, one quiet night at a time." The words resonated with Kenzie, contrasting sharply with his own path. He had clawed his way up from nothing, but success had isolated him further, turning relationships into transactions. Respect swelled in his chest for this woman who had chosen invisibility not out of defeat, but as a deliberate act of healing. As she spoke, the trace routine completed its cycle. A new map bloomed on the screen, revealing a web of shell accounts nested like Russian dolls. Alaia zoomed in, highlighting discrepancies that his entire risk team had overlooked for months. "See here? These transfers cycle through dummy entities in Panama, then bounce to Cyprus. But the timestamps align perfectly with your quarterly audits. Someone manipulated the ledgers to make it look organic." Kenzie leaned in, his mind racing. The layers of deception peeled back under her scrutiny, exposing vulnerabilities he had trusted others to guard. "My team runs triple checks on those." "How did they miss this?" "Because it is subtle," Alaia replied. "Like a whisper in a storm. But once you know the voice, you hear it everywhere." They dove deeper together, Kenzie providing passwords for restricted archives while Alaia cross-referenced them against the suspicious flows. As the morning light strengthened, casting a warm glow over the disheveled office, Kenzie found himself opening up in return. He recounted meeting Elias Ward a decade earlier, during a frantic merger that could have sunk his fledgling firm. Elias was the sharpest mind in the room back then, Kenzie said, his voice laced with nostalgia. We met at a conference in Geneva. I was 28, scraping by on coffee and ambition. He was the analyst who spotted a flaw in my pitch that no one else did. Saved me from a bad deal. After that, he joined as my right hand. We built this together, every expansion, every billion-dollar play. He was like the brother I never had, always there with the steady advice, the late-night strategy sessions. I trusted him with everything. Alaia nodded thoughtfully, her expression neutral as she navigated another layer of the web. But her next discovery sharpened the air between them. These board approvals, she said, pulling up a series of digital signatures. They are forged. The metadata shows edits post-submission. Look, the original timestamps were altered by someone with admin access. As they delved further, suspense thickened the air. A sudden alert flashed on Alaia's screen, a remote access attempt probing the isolated systems. He is testing us, she murmured, her fingers flying to erect barriers. The intrusion bounced off her countermeasures, but not before leaving a trace, Elias's personal VPN, hastily masked. Kenzie's jaw tightened. He knows we are onto something. The realization fueled a cold resolve. He grabbed his phone and dialed the first of several minor players flagged in the logs, a junior trader named Reyes, whose approvals appeared on forged documents. The call connected on the third ring. Mr. Perry? This is unexpected. Cut the surprise, Reyes. We have logs showing your sign-off on transfers you should not have touched. Explain. A pause, then a stammered confession. It was Elias. He said it was routine, part of a confidential restructure. I did not question it, he is your right hand. Kenzie pressed two more accomplices, a compliance officer and a mid-level accountant, each yielding fragments under his relentless questioning. Partial admissions of following orders, blind to the bigger picture, but enough to confirm Elias's orchestration. None knew the full syndicate ties, but their words wove a net closing around the man Kenzie had trusted like family. Through it all, Alaia remained a pillar of quiet strength, her presence a steady counterpoint to his rising fury. As the calls ended, she shared a story from her heritage, her voice weaving it seamlessly into the moment. In the Talmud, there is a tale of a man betrayed by his closest ally, left destitute in the desert. But he finds redemption not in vengeance, but in forgiveness that rebuilds. Turn from evil and do good, it teaches. Confrontation can be a path to light, if we choose it. Her words tempered Kenzie's anger, reminding him that strength lay in measured action, not blind rage. Inspired, they mapped out the next steps, securing the office against further breaches. Alaia fortified digital perimeters with layered firewalls, while Kenzie alerted building security to monitor entrances discreetly. Physical locks on sensitive rooms clicked into place, and they relocated key servers to a hardened backup node. By late afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon and cast amber hues across the suite, they finalized plans for a trap. Alaia would seed bait files, decoy data laced with trackers, to lure Elias into revealing more. Kenzie would feign ignorance in a carefully worded message, drawing him closer without spooking him. We said it tonight, Kenzie said, his voice firm. And this before he slips away. Alaia agreed, her intelligent eyes reflecting the same resolve. The office, once a symbol of his solitary empire, now felt like a shared fortress. As they prepared, the deepening betrayal hung heavy, but so did the budding alliance that promised to mend what was broken. As the amber light of late afternoon gave way to the deepening blue of evening, Kenzie and Alaia moved with purposeful urgency through the suite. The plan they had sketched out hung in the air like a charged promise, transforming the space from a place of quiet strategy into a bastion ready for siege. Kenzie locked the main doors manually, overriding the automated system with a code only he knew, while Alaia worked at the workstation to seal digital entry points. They were no longer just reacting, they were escalating, turning the tables on the betrayal that had nearly destroyed everything. Kenzie dragged a heavy conference table across the room to barricade the secondary entrance, his muscles straining under the effort. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but the physical labor grounded him, a stark contrast to the abstract battles he usually fought with spreadsheets and calls. Alaia, meanwhile, rigged temporary alarms using spare motion sensors from the security closet, simple devices that would buzz if anyone approached the hall outside. She taped them to the door frames, her movements efficient and calm, as if fortifying an office against intrusion were as routine as her nightly cleaning rounds. "These will give us a few seconds warning," she said, testing one with a wave of her hand. The sharp beep cut through the quiet, satisfying in its immediacy. Kenzie nodded, appreciating how her expertise extended beyond code to practical survival. Together, they dimmed the lights in the outer corridors via the building's app, creating pockets of shadow that would slow any unwanted visitor. The office, high above the city, now felt isolated in a new way, not lonely, but defended, a shared stronghold against the encroaching night. With the physical barriers in place, Alaia returned to the workstation to craft the bait. Her fingers danced over the keys, generating decoy files that mimicked sensitive data, fabricated board minutes, altered financial projections, and dummy transaction logs laced with invisible trackers. These were honey pots, designed to entice Elias into exposing his next move. She embedded subtle vulnerabilities, apparent weak spots in the encryption, that would draw him in without raising suspicion. "He will see what he expects," she explained, her voice steady. "A system still vulnerable, ripe for another strike. But when he touches these, we will know exactly where he is and what he takes." Kenzie watched her work, the glow of the screens illuminating her soft features. As she layered the traps, he found himself reflecting on the hollowness that had defined his life until this crisis. Wealth had come in waves, billions accumulating like trophies in a glass case, but it had left him empty, a man surrounded by power yet starved for connection. Late nights alone in this very suite, staring at market tickers while the world slept, had become his norm. Relationships had withered under the demands of his empire, friends turned into contacts, family into distant memories. He had convinced himself that dominance was enough, that vulnerability was a luxury for the weak. But now, in the midst of ruin, Alaia's compassion pierced that facade. Her quiet presence, her willingness to stand with him without expectation, offered a solace he had not known he craved. It was as if she saw through the handsome exterior and the intense aura to the boy who had once hidden his fears behind ambition. He glanced at her, the modest uniform a reminder of how society dismissed people like her, yet here she was, his equal in this fight. "You make this feel possible," he admitted quietly, breaking the silence. "Not just saving the company, but facing what comes next." Alaia paused, her intelligent eyes meeting his with warmth. "We all carry emptiness at times," she replied gently. "But filling it starts with one step, one person. You are not alone in this anymore." Their moment of reflection shattered as Kenzie's phone vibrated with incoming alerts. External pressures were mounting, the world outside beginning to sense the cracks in Perry Capital. Media outlets buzzed with rumors, whispers of a massive liquidity crisis, anonymous sources claiming the firm teetered on insolvency. He scrolled through headlines on his tablet, Perry Empire on the brink, one read, citing unnamed insiders. Investors were already pulling out, emails flooded in from partners withdrawing commitments, citing market volatility as a polite veil for panic. Stock futures tied to his holdings dipped sharply in after-hours trading, a domino effect that could cascade into full collapse by morning if not stemmed. "We cannot ignore this," Kenzie said, showing her the screen. "The syndicate is fanning the flames. They want the chaos to cover their tracks." Alaia nodded, absorbing the news with her characteristic calm. Together, they analyzed the rival syndicate's motives, piecing together fragments from the decrypted files. It boiled down to jealousy, a festering resentment over Kenzie's dominance in the global markets. The syndicate, a loose alliance of older firms he had outpaced through innovation and aggression, saw him as a disruptor who had stolen their thunder. Mergers they once controlled now bowed to his bids, clients they courted flocked to his funds. Elias's alliance with them was the perfect revenge, a way to dismantle the upstart from within, restoring their faded glory while enriching themselves on the scraps. But Alaia delved deeper, hacking into Elias's archived emails with a backdoor she had slipped through earlier. The messages humanized him in unexpected ways, revealing a man trapped in Kenzie's shadow. "Look at this," she said, highlighting a chain from months ago. Elias wrote to a confidant about the endless grind, the credit always going to Kenzie while he labored in obscurity. "He shines, I sweat," one email read, laced with bitterness. Another lamented missed family milestones, sacrificed for deals that bore Kenzie's name. It painted Elias not as a monster, but as a resentful partner worn down by inequality, his grievances festering until the syndicate's offer provided an out. Kenzie read the words, a mix of anger and reluctant understanding stirring within him. "I never saw it," he murmured. "I thought we were building together." "Shadows can twist even good men," Alaia offered softly. "But knowing this, it gives us an edge. He is desperate, not invincible." Tension escalated as evening deepened, the city lights twinkling below like distant stars. A sudden noise echoed from the hall, a faint jiggle at the outer door. Kenzie froze, motioning Alaia to silence. Through the peephole, he glimpsed a figure in nondescript clothes, fiddling with the lock. Elias's proxy, no doubt, sent to retrieve or destroy evidence. The alarms they had set remained quiet, the intruder cautious enough to avoid triggering them outright. Heart pounding, Kenzie whispered, "Back way." They slipped into an adjacent storage room, Alaia grabbing the laptop mid-transfer to keep the bait files active. The proxy probed for minutes, testing the barricade, but the fortified measures held. A frustrated thud echoed as the figure retreated, footsteps fading down the stairwell. Kenzie exhaled, the near miss sharpening their senses. "Too close," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "He is getting bold." Alaia reconnected the systems, her quiet strength unwavering. "It means he is worried. The bait is working." They resumed their vigil, the office now humming with heightened alert. Kenzie sent a feigned ignorance message to Elias, "Rough night with systems. Need your input tomorrow. Everything okay on your end?" It was a lure, designed to reassure while drawing him in. Hours ticked by, the suite wrapped in artificial light as night fully claimed the sky. Alaia monitored the trackers, her expression focused. Then, just past midnight, an alert pinged. "He is in," she said, voice taut with controlled excitement. The remote access originated from an obfuscated IP, but the trackers confirmed it. Elias had bitten, logging into the decoy workstation. Files opened under his credentials, his digital fingerprints leaving a trail straight to him. He probed the bait, downloading segments that would reveal his location and intentions. Kenzie stood behind her, the impending confrontation looming like a storm on the horizon. The trap had sprung, pulling Elias closer to the revelation that would force everything into the open. As the data flowed, the alliance between Kenzie and Alaia felt unbreakable, a beacon against the betrayal's darkness. The workstation hummed softly in the dim light, the trackers pulsing like a heartbeat as Elias delved deeper into the bait. Kenzie remained standing behind Alaia, his hands braced on the back of her chair, the unbreakable alliance between them a silent vow against the encroaching shadows. The city outside had fallen into midnight hush, skyscrapers twinkling like distant sentinels, unaware of the storm brewing within these walls. Alaia monitored the intrusion in real time, her soft expression masking the razor focus beneath. "He is downloading the decoys now," she whispered. "Give him a few more minutes. We need him fully committed before we move." Kenzie nodded, his intense eyes fixed on the screen. The revelation was imminent, a confrontation that would lay bare the fractures in his world. As the clock ticked past 12, an alert confirmed Elias's physical approach. Building logs showed his keycard swiping at a side entrance, bypassing the main lobby. He was coming to finish what the remote access could not, to wipe the evidence clean in person. They dimmed the remaining lights, retreating to the adjacent analysis room, a smaller space filled with dormant servers and stacked monitors, its door cracked just enough to observe the main suite. Kenzie's pulse thundered in his ears, a mix of fury and sorrow twisting in his chest. Alaia stood beside him, her gentle presence a steadying force, her hand briefly touching his arm in silent reassurance. The trap was set, now they waited for the prey to step into it. Soft footsteps echoed down the hall, deliberate and hushed. The door to the suite creaked open, and Alaia slipped inside, his familiar silhouette cutting through the gloom. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the building, heading straight for the workstation. In the faint glow of the screens, Kenzie could see the strain on his advisor's face, lines etched deeper than he remembered, eyes darting with a desperation that twisted the knife of betrayal further. Alaia seated himself at the terminal, fingers flying across the keys to initiate a full system purge. He muttered under his breath, unaware he was being watched, his actions sealing his fate with every command. Alaia waited until the purge sequence began its countdown, 30 seconds to irreversible deletion, before she stepped out from the analysis room, her modest frame illuminated by the monitor's cold light. "Stop," she said, her voice calm but unyielding, cutting through the silence like a blade. Elias froze, his head snapping up. Confusion flashed across his features, followed by dawning horror as he recognized her, not as the janitor he had dismissed countless times, but as the architect of his unraveling. "You," he breathed, rising slowly. "The cleaner? How?" Alaia advanced, pulling up windows on a secondary tablet she carried, displaying the irrefutable proof, the mislabeled transfers, the encrypted chats with the syndicate, the offshore vaults brimming with stolen funds. Every lie laid bare in glowing detail. "We have it all," she said evenly. "The forgeries, the secret meetings, the promises they made you. It ends here." Elias's face drained of color, his hands trembling as he glanced at the purge timer, 15 seconds left. He lunged for the keyboard, attempting to accelerate the shutdown, fingers stabbing at overrides to erase the damning files before she could intervene. But Alaia was faster. She activated her counter-commands remotely, her tablet syncing with the system to block his access. Firewall snapped into place, the purge halting mid-sequence with a defiant error beep. Elias slammed a fist on the desk, panic twisting his expression into something feral. "You do not understand," he snarled, backing away as if cornered. "This was never supposed to." Kenzie emerged from the shadows then, his tall form stepping into the light, heartbreak etched in every line of his structured face. The emotionally heavy aura that had always defined him now carried the weight of shattered illusions. "Elias," he said, voice thick with pain. "Why?" The room seemed to shrink around them, the dim analysis space charged with raw emotion. Elias stopped cold, eyes widening at the sight of his old friend. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the low whir of cooling fans. Then the confession spilled out, bitter and jagged, like poison long held in. "You want to know why?" Elias spat, his voice cracking. 10 years, Kenzie. 10 years in your shadow, watching you take the glory while I did the dirty work. Every merger, every billion, we built it together, but it was always your name on the door, your face in the headlines. I lived for your scraps, sacrificing my life for your empire. The syndicate saw me. They offered what you never did, a position at the top, wealth that was mine, not borrowed from your table. It was too tempting. I had to take it." Kenzie recoiled as if struck, the words piercing deeper than any financial loss. Flashes of their shared history replayed in his mind, celebratory toasts after closing deals, quiet confidences exchanged over strategy sessions, the unbreakable bond he had believed in. Now it lay in ruins, exposed as a facade built on resentment. Heartbreak warred with rage, his hands clenching at his sides. "We were brothers," he whispered, voice trembling. "I trusted you with everything." Elias laughed, a hollow sound laced with regret. "Brothers? You were the king, I was the servant. I did what I had to." The struggle erupted in an instant. Elias darted for a secondary console in the analysis room, attempting a manual system shutdown by yanking power cables and initiating a hard reset. Sparks flew as he tore at the wiring, desperation fueling his actions. Alaia moved to intercept, her overrides clashing with his frantic inputs, the screens flickering wildly between control and chaos. "You cannot erase this," she said firmly, blocking his commands with layered protocols she had embedded earlier. Kenzie surged forward, grabbing Elias by the shoulders to pull him away from the console. The two men grappled, Elias twisting with surprising ferocity, elbowing Kenzie in the ribs as he fought to reach the reset switch. Pain shot through Kenzie's side, but he held firm, using his height and strength to restrain his former advisor against the wall. Enough, Kenzie growled, pinning Elias's arms. It is over. Alaia secured the systems in the midst of the fray, her counters overriding the shutdown attempts one by one. Servers stabilized, evidence locked behind unbreakable encryption she controlled. Alaia sagged against the wall, breath ragged, the fight draining from him as defeat settled in. Security arrived moments later, summoned by Alaia's silent alert through the building's emergency line. 2 guards burst into the room, badges flashing in the dim light, cuffing Elias with efficient precision. He did not resist, his eyes locked on Kenzie with a mix of defiance and sorrow. You will regret this, he muttered as they led him away. The syndicate does not forget. The door closed behind them, leaving Kenzie and Alaia in the aftermath. Kenzie slumped against the console, the adrenaline fading to reveal the raw emotional fallout. Shattered trust clawed at him, a void where brotherhood had once stood. Rage simmered beneath the heartbreak, urging him to lash out, to dismantle everything Elias had touched. How do I come back from this? He asked, voice hoarse, his handsome features drawn with exhaustion. Alaia approached gently, her quiet strength a guiding light through his turmoil. She placed a hand on his shoulder, empathy shining in her eyes. Rage will consume you if you let it, she said softly. I learned that after David. It feels like justice, but it only deepens the wound. Confront the pain, yes, but let it teach you. Trust can break, but it can also rebuild, stronger, wiser. Her words pierced the fog of his anger, drawing him back from the edge. He looked at her, gratitude mingling with the ache, her compassion a bridge over the chasm of betrayal. Together, they secured the remaining evidence, backing up files to isolated drives, notifying authorities with encrypted submissions. The company stabilized temporarily, core systems locked down against further sabotage, buying time until dawn. As Elias was led away in cuffs, the arrest marking the end of one chapter but not the war, hints of broader threats lingered. The syndicate's reach extended far, their jealousy a venom that could strike again. Whispers of anonymous emails and shadowed alliances echoed in Kenzie's mind, a reminder that the night's victory was fragile. In the dim analysis room, with Alaia by his side, he faced the dawn not unbroken, but resolute, the primary storm weathered yet the horizon still clouded. The first pale streaks of true dawn bled across the skyline when Kenzie and Alaia stepped out of the elevator into the executive lobby. The building felt different now, no longer a battlefield, but a place ready to speak truth. Security flanked them discreetly, their presence a quiet reminder that the night's violence was over, yet the war was not. Kenzie's suit was fresh, he had changed in the private washroom, but exhaustion carved faint shadows beneath his intense eyes. Alaia stood at his right, still in her navy uniform, the master badge now clipped openly at her collar. She had refused the offer of borrowed clothes. Let them see who really saved this company, she had said, and Kenzie had not argued. Reporters and camera crews already packed the glass-walled briefing room on the mezzanine. Word had leaked, somehow, about an emergency announcement from Perry Capital at sunrise. Phones buzzed with pre-market rumors, trading desks in London and Hong Kong were lit up, waiting for confirmation of collapse or miracle. Kenzie paused at the threshold, hand resting briefly on Alaia's elbow. Last chance to stay off camera, he murmured. Once we do this, everything changes for you. She met his gaze with that calm strength he had come to rely on. Everything already changed, Kenzie. I am ready. They walked in together. The room erupted in flashes and shouted questions the moment they appeared. Kenzie raised one hand for silence, and to everyone's surprise, it fell almost instantly. The weight of the night carried in his posture, in the set of his jaw, in the woman at his side who should never have been there at all. He did not step behind the podium alone. He pulled a second chair forward so Alaia could stand with him, shoulder to shoulder, equal height under the lights. Good morning, he began, voice steady despite the storm inside. 12 hours ago, Perry Capital was minutes from total annihilation. Billions were vanishing, systems were locked, and every safeguard I built had failed. I am here to tell you exactly what happened, who did it, and how we stopped it. No teleprompter. No prepared remarks. Just truth, raw and unfiltered. He laid it out in merciless detail, the coordinated strike, the internal betrayal, the rival syndicate's promises. He named Elias Ward without hesitation, named the offshore vaults, named the forged approvals. Cameras rolled. Markets trembled. Every word carried the risk of lawsuits, of libel claims, of panic that could finish what Elias had started. Yet Kenzie did not flinch. And none of this would be known, he continued, turning to Alaia, if not for the woman standing beside me. Alaia Harmon has cleaned these offices for the last 18 months. Last night she walked in with a cart and walked out with the fate of my company in her hands. She is the reason we are still breathing. He listed her achievements without exaggeration, the accounts she froze, the trails she followed, the confrontation in the analysis room. He credited her openly, fully, without the patronizing tone the world usually reserved for unlikely heroes. Gasps rippled through the press corps when they realized the quiet woman in the janitor uniform had outsmarted an entire syndicate and a traitor with a decade of access. Elias said little, only a brief, composed statement thanking Kenzie for trusting her and affirming that integrity still mattered more than profit. Her voice, soft yet clear, carried the authority of someone who had nothing left to prove and everything to protect. Questions exploded afterward, about lawsuits, about Elias's motives, about Alaia's background, but Kenzie controlled the room with calm precision. He announced immediate reforms, independent forensic audits every quarter, a new oversight board with external members, and the creation of an integrity division reporting directly to the chair. We will never be blind again, he said, and the conviction in his tone rang like iron. By the time they stepped away from the microphones, the narrative had already shifted. Phones in the room lit up with breaking alerts, major investors reversing withdrawals, partners issuing statements of renewed confidence, pre-market futures climbing instead of cratering. Honesty, the riskiest gamble of Kenzie's career, had paid dividends no one could have predicted. Back in the private elevator, the doors closed on the chaos below, and Kenzie finally let the mask slip. He leaned against the wall, eyes closing for a long moment. When he opened them, Alaia was watching him with gentle concern. You were extraordinary, he said quietly. I threw you into the fire, and you lit the way out. She shook her head. We did it together. You chose truth when hiding would have been easier. That took courage I did not give you. He reached for her hand, an uncharacteristic gesture that felt entirely natural now. You are my anchor, Alaia. In the worst night of my life, you kept me from drifting into something I could never forgive myself for becoming. Her fingers curled around his, warm and steady. And you reminded me that stepping out of the shadows does not have to mean losing myself. The elevator opened onto the top floor, now bathed in full morning light. Investigators waited, federal agents coordinating with the city's financial crimes unit. Elias had spent the night in custody and, faced with the mountain of evidence, had signed a full confession hours earlier. Names, dates, syndicate contacts, everything Kenzie needed to dismantle the broader threat. Raids were already underway on 2 continents. The loose ends were tying themselves into knots the law would tighten. Kenzie spent the next hours in meetings, signing statements, authorizing transfers to restore liquidity. By noon, Perry Capital was no longer bleeding, it was stabilizing, then strengthening. Clients called personally to pledge support. Employees who had fled in panic the night before sent messages of apology and loyalty. Yet the rebound was only half the story. In the quiet between calls, Kenzie found Alaia in the small kitchenette, pouring tea with the same unhurried grace she had always possessed. He closed the door behind him. The world sees you now, he said. They will offer you anything, jobs, money, fame. Whatever you want is yours. She set the cups down and looked at him, soft intelligence shining through tired eyes. I know what I want, she answered simply. Peace. Purpose. And perhaps, someone who sees me the way you do. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, cupping her face gently. Then stay. Not as the janitor who saved me. As the woman who did. Outside the windows, the city roared back to life, markets climbing, headlines rewriting themselves. Inside, two people who had been broken in different ways began to heal in the same light. The company's rebound had begun, stronger, cleaner, more vigilant, but the deeper recovery, the mending of trust and heart, was only just starting. Emotional wounds still ached beneath the triumph, tender and real, yet no longer faced alone. The weeks that followed the dawn briefing passed like the slow turning of a page that had once been torn in half. Markets steadied, then rose. Headlines moved on to fresher scandals. Perry Capital emerged not merely intact but burnished, spoken of in boardrooms with a new reverence, the firm that had bled in public and chosen truth over cover-up. Behind the numbers, quieter miracles were taking place. Investigations closed one by one. Federal indictments landed on the syndicate's leadership, offshore accounts were frozen and repatriated. Elias, facing decades in prison, cooperated fully, his bitterness spent. The last threat dissolved into courtroom dates and asset forfeitures. By the end of the month, no shadow remained that could reach them. Kenzie used the breathing space the way a man uses silence after a long fever. He walked the halls at odd hours, spoke to employees he had once only nodded at, and listened more than he commanded. The ruthless discipline that had built the empire was still there, but it now served something larger than dominance. And at the center of every change stood Alaia. The renovation began without fanfare. Kenzie quietly gutted the entire 32nd floor, once a sterile trading room lined with rows of shouting brokers, and turned it into something new. Glass partitions came down. Natural light poured in. Workstations were arranged in circles rather than ranks. At the entrance, a simple bronze plaque waited under protective cloth, Harmon Integrity Center. On the morning of the unveiling, Alaia arrived expecting another routine security briefing. Instead, Kenzie met her at the elevator, took her hand without a word, and led her through the new corridors. Analysts, some former law enforcement forensics experts, others young prodigies handpicked for conscience as much as skill, paused in their work to greet her with genuine respect. No one called her the janitor anymore, yet no one treated her like a curiosity either. She belonged. He stopped her in front of the plaque and pulled the cloth away himself. Harmon Integrity Center. Dedicated to Alaia Harmon, whose quiet courage reminded us that integrity is measured not by what we gain, but by what we refuse to lose. Alaia stared at the words, eyes shining, one hand rising to her lips. Kenzie. You are not a guest here, he said softly. You are its heart. Lead analyst, partner level, full authority. The title is yours, but the mission is ours. She turned to him then, and for the first time in the bright light of day, with no crisis pressing them, she let him see the tears. I came here to hide, she whispered. You gave me a place to stand instead. That evening they shared their first real meal outside the office, not takeout eaten over keyboards, but a quiet Shabbat dinner she prepared in the small apartment she still kept. Candles flickered on a simple table. Challah steamed beneath an embroidered cover. Kenzie watched her kindle the flames and recite the blessing, the ancient Hebrew rolling gently from her tongue. When she finished, she looked up and smiled at his quiet attention. I have not done this with anyone since David, she admitted. I have never done this with anyone, he answered. Teach me. So she did. Over weeks of Friday nights, she taught him the prayers, the songs, the deliberate pause from the world's noise. He stumbled over the Hebrew at first, earnest and awkward in a way that made her laugh until her eyes crinkled. In return he taught her the rhythms of rest he had never allowed himself, long walks without phones, mornings without market alerts, the simple pleasure of coffee on a balcony while the city woke beneath them. They spoke of faith and purpose late into those nights. Alaia told him stories from the Talmud about broken vessels and scattered sparks, how the world is repaired one small act at a time. Kenzie listened, the emotionally heavy aura that had once isolated him softening under her words. He began to understand that strength was not the absence of doubt but the courage to carry it gently. He also began, slowly, to mend other fractures. One Sunday he flew to the small town where his sister still lived, the one he had not visited in 8 years. He sat at her kitchen table, apologized without excuses, and listened while she cried and forgave him in the same breath. When he returned, Alaia greeted him with a knowing smile and a hug that felt like homecoming. For Alaia, closure came differently. On a cool autumn afternoon she took Kenzie to the cemetery where David rested. She stood before the stone, spoke a quiet Kaddish, and laid a small pebble atop it. "I was afraid to live again," she told Kenzie afterward, wind lifting strands of her hair. "Grief convinced me that joy would be betrayal. You showed me it is continuation." Through it all, their bond deepened in ordinary, extraordinary moments, shared lunches in the new center, her hand brushing his when they passed reports, evenings on the couch with her feet tucked beneath his thigh, debating ethics and markets until they forgot the hour. The first night he kissed her, slow and reverent, in the doorway of the apartment, both of them trembling with the weight of what it meant to choose life again. One December evening, snow just beginning to fall against the windows of the Integrity Center, Kenzie found her alone in the main lab reviewing a final audit. The room was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of monitors and the city beyond. He closed the door and crossed to her, carrying a small velvet box he had kept hidden for days. "I have something to say," he began, voice low, "and I need you to hear all of it." Alaia turned, curiosity softening into something tender as she saw his expression. "You saved my company," he said. "Everyone knows that. What they do not know is that you saved me long before the first account was restored. I was rich in everything except what mattered. You taught me that humanity is not weakness, it is the only thing worth protecting. I do not want to lead this new chapter alone. I do not want to wake up tomorrow, or any tomorrow, without you beside me." He opened the box. Inside lay not a diamond chosen for size, but a simple gold band engraved with 2 Hebrew words she had once taught him, Gamzu el Tova. "This, too, is for the good." "I am not asking for an answer tonight," he continued, eyes searching hers. "I am asking for the rest of our lives to prove I mean it. Marry me, Alaia. Not because you saved me, but because I cannot imagine being whole without you." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. She took the ring, slid it onto her own finger, and then reached for him. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. 1,000 times, yes. Outside, snow fell thicker, blanketing the city in hush. Inside the Harmon Integrity Center, 2 people who had once hidden from the world stepped fully into the light together. The company was stable, the threats extinguished, every question resolved. Yet the deepest foundation they rebuilt was not made of steel or code or reformed policies. It was made of trust, of faith, of 2 hearts that had learned, separately and then together, how to rise after falling. Snow still drifted past the tall windows of the Harmon Integrity Center, soft and soundless, turning the city into a hushed silver world. Inside, the lights were low, the workstations silent, the staff long gone for the night. Only 2 people remained on the 32nd floor, Kenzie and Alaia, standing together at the heart of the space that now carried her name. The bronze plaque glowed faintly under the recessed lighting, the engraved words already familiar yet still astonishing every time she read them. Alaia traced the letters with one fingertip, the gold band Kenzie had placed on her hand weeks earlier catching the light. She had accepted his proposal that snowy evening, and since then the ring had become as natural to her as breathing. Tonight, though, something in the air felt different, charged, expectant, as though the building itself waited to exhale. Kenzie closed the last report on the central screen, turned the key that powered the room down for the night, and faced her fully. For a long moment he simply looked, no words, no practiced charm, just the raw, unguarded gaze of a man who had learned how to be seen. "I used to stand in this exact spot," he said at last, voice low, "when it was still a trading floor. I would watch the numbers climb and tell myself I had won. The louder the room shouted, the prouder I felt. I thought that was power." He shook his head, a faint, rueful smile touching his lips. "I was so arrogant. So alone. And I did not even know I was starving." Alaia waited, patient as always, the gentle presence that had once pushed a cleaning cart now the steady center of his universe. That night, he continued, stepping closer, when everything collapsed and the screens bled red, I believed I had lost it all. My fortune, my name, my future. I was ready to fall with it. Then you walked in. You looked at the same dying empire and saw something worth saving. Not the money, the man behind it. His voice roughened, emotion rising like a tide he no longer tried to hold back. You did not just save my company, Alaia. You saved my soul from the prison I had built brick by brick out of pride and isolation. You showed me that real wealth is measured in kindness given when no one is watching, in second chances offered to the broken, in the courage to trust again after betrayal. You changed my life in seconds. He took her hands, the tall, handsome man with the intense eyes now trembling before the quiet woman who had once emptied his trash. I have spent every day since trying to prove I am worthy of that gift, he said, the words catching. I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving it, if you will let me. Alaia's eyes shone, but she did not speak. She did not need to, everything she felt lived in the way her fingers tightened around his. Kenzie drew a steadying breath and lowered himself to one knee, right there on the polished floor of the center that bore her name. From his pocket he took a second ring, this one not simple gold, but a circle of white gold set with a single, flawless diamond that caught the snowlight and scattered it like hope. Beside the diamond, tiny Hebrew letters were engraved, Ani el dodi vidodi li, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. Alaia Harmon, he said, voice trembling with the full weight of the moment, you changed my life in seconds. Let me spend the rest of mine proving it. Marry me, not as the woman who rescued an empire, but as the woman who rescued me. Be my partner, my home, my light. Say you will. For a heartbeat the room held its breath. Then Alaia sank to her knees in front of him, tears falling freely now, and cupped his face between her palms. I already said yes, she whispered, laughter and tears mingling. But I will say it again every morning and every night for as long as we breathe. Yes, Kenzie. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger beside the first, and they rose together into an embrace that felt like the closing of a circle begun the night a cleaning cart rolled into a dying empire. Outside, snow kept falling, soft and forgiving, covering the city in quiet grace. Months later, on a warm spring afternoon, they stood beneath a chuppah of white roses in the garden of the rebuilt estate that was now their home. Kenzie wore simple linen, Alaia wore ivory silk that shimmered when she moved. His sister stood beside him, eyes bright with happy tears. Colleagues from the Integrity Center filled the seats, no longer employees but family. When the rabbi pronounced them husband and wife, Kenzie lifted Alaia's veil and kissed her with the reverence of a man who had learned that miracles sometimes wear modest uniforms and speak in gentle voices. The company thrived, stronger, cleaner, more humane than it had ever been. The Harmon Integrity Center became a beacon, training a new generation to guard wealth with conscience. Investors sought Perry Capital not just for returns, but for the certainty that here, at least, profit would never again be purchased with betrayal. Yet the greater triumph was private. Two souls, once shattered by different storms, one by ambition, one by grief, had found each other in the unlikeliest of moments and chosen to heal together. They built traditions, Friday night candles, Saturday walks, Sunday mornings tangled in sheets and laughter. They built a family, first with rescued dogs, then, in time, with children who would grow up knowing their mother once saved the world with nothing but courage and a cleaning cart. And sometimes, when the city was quiet and the snow fell again, Kenzie would stand with Alaia at the window of the center that bore her name and remember the night everything almost ended. He would take her hand, press a kiss to the rings that told their story, and whisper the words that had become their vow. You changed my life in seconds. She would smile, soft and radiant, and answer the only way she ever needed to. And you gave me the rest of mine. In the end, the empire was only money. Their real fortune was measured in kindness witnessed, in second chances claimed, in two overlooked hearts that refused to stay invisible. And somewhere, in offices and hallways around the world, quiet figures pushed carts and emptied bins and kept the lights on long after the powerful had gone home, heroes waiting, unnoticed, for the moment the world would need them most.